The fact that these companies can pour hundreds of millions of dollars into lobbying DC to get the kind of regulation they want to define AI safety and security is very, very dangerous. None of them would answer a question about children having mental health issues due to AI because you believe that generative AI is smart. It's insidious in the sense that it is very subversive. It's reinforcing a bias maybe you already have or introducing a bias. It is incorrect to say it's based on the data of the world because the world is not represented in the internet.
Welcome to Disruptor Confessions. I'm John Ayers. Today's episode actually may make some people feel uncomfortable because AI isn't just helping us, it's judging us. It's deciding who gets hired, who gets flagged, who is trusted. And when systems make the wrong decision, it's not always clear who is accountable. Today, we're sitting down with Dr. Rumman Chowdhury, one of the leading experts around responsible AI. And she is one of those people who ask the question, who is responsible when machines decide? Rumman, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So I might embarrass you right at the top of the call here, but I have to just run through. Like you're a Time 100 AI honoree. You appointed U.S. Science Envoy, AI Safety Board, New York City AI Steering Committee, co-founded Humane Intelligence, which I want to talk to you a little bit about. You're global advisor for responsible AI. You're ex-Twitter, ex-Accenture. You drove a lot of responsible AI there. I think you're a Harvard fellow for responsible AI. I mean, the list continues, right? So I guess to start off,
I'm tired hearing you say it.
I guess when someone says, what do? I kind of want to just ask you, how do you answer that? What do you tell them?
My passion has always been understanding human behavior using data and technology. And this predates my time even in tech. I'm a quantitative social scientist by background. I think it's very fascinating to study humans and human behavior. That's what got me into tech. What keeps me going today is actually bringing in people's voices into how technology is built.
So when you say that, it still begs the question, how do you describe what you do to the general public?
Well, one really interesting marked shift since ChatGPT sort of hit the world is that everyone's really smart about AI and technology. And what I have loved in the time that I've been in this field, and like this marks 9 years working in responsible AI alone, is that people's level of sophistication has actually risen a lot. So you're right. Before I had to explain what is responsible AI, like what is irresponsible AI, right? People didn't understand how AI could be good or bad or isn't just technology. I think people have an understanding now. So when I say things like, I make sure that products are built ethically and responsibly, or that the AI that's being built is built to serve you, to help you, people get it right away in a way they used to not. By now, just about everybody's had some sort of an interaction with an AI that just felt, for lack of a better word, stupid, right? It's like this AI should know this thing that seems to be common understanding, or why is it so hard for an AI system to navigate this decision? And then it's not too much of a stretch to say, but I hear AI is being used in hiring. They want to use AI in surveillance. They want to use it in airports, right? Well, if it can't do this basic task, then how am I going to trust that it's going to do this bigger task, this more impactful task? And that's, I think people, they've put two and two together, which is really great. So when I come in and say, my job is to make sure that people's voices are heard in building technology, and specifically I do it by testing AI models, people like it, a light bulb goes off.
So I want to cover the word responsible. There's two things that come to mind when I hear responsible AI. Well, actually three, but one is, I'm comforted, I'm assured. I feel like this reassurance that someone's saying responsible AI. So that's one part of my thinking. But the other part is it's very vague. It's very vague to say responsible AI. The third part, which we'll probably talk a lot about, is who do you trust when someone says they're practicing responsible AI? But first and foremost, this term of responsible AI being reassuring and kind of the vagueness of it, can you just walk through how you define responsible AI in today as we're recording this in early 2026?
Well, responsible AI is just the practice of making sure that AI is operating as intended, that it is, and its intention is not making money. The intention is not growing big. The intention should be solving problems for us. And to be perfectly frank, I think sometimes Silicon Valley loses that perspective. I think people get very, very excited, naively almost, about the capabilities of the technology, and they forget that the purpose of the technology isn't just to build the technology. The purpose of technology is actually to solve problems, and responsible AI is the function that makes sure that we are still solving meaningful problems. The technology works for people, and figuring out ways that if it's not working for people, how to go about fixing it.
So that might actually be good theme through today's conversation because there's the companies who are driving it. I'll just name them, like the Anthropics and the OpenAIs and the Google DeepMinds, the leading companies. But then you have all the industries trying to enable these capabilities within their companies, within their
Yep,
enterprise.
yep,
Those are two areas. But then you also have the human centered, those of us who are just using the tools, we're jumping on to
yeah.
ChatGPT. So let's kind of use that to start. What are companies doing or saying when they are claiming to be responsible? How are they qualifying or are they pretending to be responsible?
Yeah, and ethics washing is definitely a term. And I think people are right to be suspicious. And to be honest, the ecosystem is not fully robust, right? So in today's world, especially with frontier AI companies, they own and define what responsibility means, right? So just I think last week, Sam Altman announced that they are making a position to lead AI preparedness. So I guess that's the new,
I saw
there's
that.
always a new trendy term, right? So it was responsibility, well, it was ethics, then it was responsibility, then it was, for a while it was trustworthy, it goes, it cycles. And now I guess the new word's preparedness. And while it is very important, and there are really wonderful people who work at these companies, and in a minute I'll tell you exactly what these people do, that ecosystem is not fully built out, right? Because to balance people at companies, you do need independent auditors. That world of people is very, very small slash barely exists, right? So there's an ecosystem of people that needs to exist to actually fully say, hey, we as an industry have defined what it means to build technology responsibly. So back to like what people at these companies do and how do they define it. So first that it's defined very, very differently at every single company. And especially with generative AI and frontier AI, there's a less of a focus on the individual societal impact and more of these like bigger existential risks. There's more of a fear of self-replicating AI or AI that's going to, mislead or harm. But, from my perspective, the issue is more human than that, right? The technology that we build is built on biased data that comes from a biased world. And the output of that technology is harmful, not because the AI is so smart or lying to us or all of these anthropomorphic words, but actually that it's flaws in human development of these models. So it's much more, it serves companies very well to sell the narrative of AI responsibility as being about these big issues of whether AI will come alive or AI will harm or AI will lie to us, because it absolves them of the responsibility of having to fix the problem, right? So, we should all take it with a grain of salt that the same people who are saying AI will take away every job are also feverishly building AI. If it was going to kill us all, then why are you, sir, the one building it, right? So you got to ask yourself, like, so if they're so concerned about it, they don't seem to stop building it. So I will say again, and I used to do this job, right? There's a lot of work to be done inside a company to build AI responsibly. So part of it's just ensuring the product that is built with the appropriate data, representative data, doing the right kind of test and analysis, where there's a lot you do before a product is even put out there. And people are familiar with like product testing, right? So it's a lot of product testing, auditing, assessment. I now focus on something called red teaming, which is bringing in external experts to test AI models and then, monitoring the product when it goes out into the world. One of the biggest missing parts to all of this is a good feedback loop, right? If you've worked with an AI model and it does something wrong, how do you get that problem fixed? Let's say you assume that the company in good faith wants to fix that problem. How do you notify them? How do you let them know? And how can they go and fix it? How do you know that that problem's been fixed? So how do you create that accountability loop? And the last part actually is focusing a lot on governance. So there are not clear laws and policies at the moment. So everyone's kind of, patchworking what governance means. So there's the EU AI Act, there might be, California's privacy laws, there are new laws passing in different states, there's all sorts of stuff. People are piecing that together. And it's a lot of work for people in responsible AI to work with policy teams to say, okay, if the EU AI Act says this, qualitatively, like in words, this model should be non-discriminatory. I have to, as a responsible AI lead, figure out how to technically define non-discriminatory and demonstrate this non-discriminatory behavior. So it's actually a really, really interesting job. But again, like that is necessary, but insufficient.
So you covered several topics that I want to touch on. One, I think you're right. People are they're more curious than they've ever been, I think, after ChatGPT. And
Yeah.
quite honestly, people, when you talk about LLMs, large language, people kind of start to get what you're talking about. But you mentioned frontier models. There's a term called global models, large language models. Can you briefly walk us through how those are similar or different?
Yeah, back to the fact there's like a million different terms to refer to kind of the same thing. So um, people tend to use generative AI and large language model interchangeably. And actually, it's kind of incorrect. A large language model is what ChatGPT is, which is literally an AI model that generates text. Generative AI, think of it as like a class above that. These are AI models that generate things, as the name implies, right? They're also sometimes called frontier models, which I think was just kind of a fancy selling, like, kind of a marketing thing to make front on the frontier, right? So frontier AI model, if I were to be nitpicky, is like, whatever the latest model is the frontier model. But really we're talking about the class of generative AI models, models that generate things, right? So we are familiar with large language models like ChatGPT, but now people are increasingly familiar with video generation and image generation. This is where we get into Sora, we get into Nano Banana, right? So so these are all in the family of generative AI models. It is also one thing, just an observation. It's very fascinating to me that nobody ever talks about image generation models as being sentient, even though they are fundamentally the same kind of construct. They are making a different thing. They're making an image. And I think it's interesting. It really speaks to the human propensity to want to anthropomorphize, believe that things are alive, like we name our cars, right? We our our desire to believe that things are alive is so strong that if you think about it dispassionately, this class of generative AI models generates many things. You can generate voice, you can generate image, you can generate text, you can generate video. Why is it that language model, text generation, is the one that people think is quote unquote alive? And no one's here saying, wow, Nano Banana must be alive because it makes hyper sophisticated videos. I just find it really interesting.
Super interesting. And you may not be aware, we just finished a series with 5 AI filmmakers across the globe from different regions. And they talk deeply about the tools that they're using for video and imagery and advertising and filmmaking. It was quite fascinating. And actually, they talked a little bit about bias in the models. They would bring up a specific prompt for particular environment or a culture,
Yep.
and it would be very stereotypical. I want to jump back real quick. You covered several things. You mentioned red teaming. I want to touch on that. We just touched on large language models. You were co-founder of Humane Intelligence. Just briefly, what is it, and why did you start that organization?
Yeah, Humane Intelligence was a nonprofit I co-founded a few years ago to bring different communities into testing and evaluating AI models. There's this big gap in how AI models are built, especially generative AI models, where everything happens in a house. And, everyone keeps saying, oh, it's a black box and nobody understands and whatever. And that doesn't actually matter. What matters is who's in the room when you're evaluating these models and what good means, what good is defined as, right? So whenever a new model comes out and all the media is breathlessly reporting on how it performs, this model performs better. You have to ask, what does better mean? What is good, right? And very specifically, whoever defines what good is the one with who's controlling the direction and shape of AI models. The purpose of human intelligence is to bring in regular people into how these models are tested. So we had tested with architects and scientists and educators and K to 12 students, UNESCO delegations, student organizations, activists, nowhere that did I say AI experts because there's a lot of those in the room, right? These are all people who are impacted by AI models who have something to say and have perspective, and I wanted to make sure those perspectives were heard. So as of last August, I actually left Humane Intelligence, a nonprofit. It's still a functioning entity under new leadership, and I've started a public benefit corporation. So it's a for-profit, and I'm building infrastructure for evaluation. So in order to do the kind of inclusive evaluations that we're talking about here, you actually need a new infrastructure, a new way of thinking about how we test and evaluate AI models. As you know, I was at Twitter, and I was at Twitter when Elon Musk took over. Now, according to the board that decided to sell the company to Musk, the discussions they had in the room actually is that it is, from a pure C Corp for profit entity perspective, irrelevant who the person is trying to buy the company. All that matters is fiduciary duty, fiduciary responsibility. And what fiduciary responsibility means is that it is the board's job to take action that is in the financial interest of the corporation. And their decision to sell to Elon Musk, even though everybody pretty much agreed that it would be disastrous for democracy, it would be, he was going to do everything he's doing today. I don't think anybody is surprised. But their argument was that we have to sell the company to him because he is offering twice what the company's even worth. And that really, for all of us at Twitter, that really, those words, fiduciary responsibility, are burned into our brains. So as I think about creating a for profit, I want to make sure that I am never in that position.
I would love to be a fly on the wall back when you were there in those rooms. I'm
I
sure
wrote
you
I
have.
wrote an op-ed for Atlantic actually about, just the impact. If there's one thing I took away from that time, it's that culture is very, very fragile. And even
Mm,
at a company like Twitter, which actually had a really, really strong culture, an open culture, like we were quite, like it was a company that was very, very open publicly. It was very open even on our Slack channels. Dissent was welcome. To see the chilling effect that he had even before walking in that door, the kind of weird policing and the self-preservation that people started to engage in was really hard to see. It was, and he was like a specter at that point. He wasn't even running the company yet.
right,
So,
right.
I wrote an entire op-ed about how sad it was to see the death of a particular kind of, sort of Twitter somehow retained its kind of startup-y vibe, even though it was obviously a full-fledged company. And I love that about it. And, it only took a few months of one person to kill it all.
Yeah, yeah. Going back to kind of your theme of responsible AI and your course of your history of your work at Twitter and Accenture and the nonprofit Humane Intelligence, I can't help but think about the assessments, the audits of models. And I work in the strategic consulting space. A lot of my work is around marketing strategy. We often talk about large language models being public kind of models, but also working with an organization, a company's own data. And that
Mhm,
becomes very much grounded, what I would say grounded data. It's grounded in their product or service.
mhm,
Now, when I think about it in the world that you live in, and especially in 2026, I think we're going to see humans and agents working more together than we did, say, the last year or two. We're going to start to
mhm.
see maturity in that. My question to you is, we would never take a pharmaceutical company. We would never say, go ahead, build your pharmaceutical drug, test it, deploy it. You tell us if it's safe. I don't think any of us would say that.
Right, right. I agree.
That's okay. We accept that. So are we saying go ahead, build your data models, build your LLMs, test it, deploy it. You tell us if it's safe or not, and we'll just can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, that is probably the big global policy debate happening right now, right? The current US administration, that's their perspective, right? I mean, to the extent that, President Trump wants to ban states from even passing regulation, which is, that's certainly something. Apparently, the Party of States' Rights doesn't believe in states' rights when they feel like it may impede technological development. That's what the companies are saying to some extent, right? Some of the narrative is around like, and again, a lot of the narrative around anthropomorphizing AI, making it sound bigger than it is. I was watching this TikTok, interestingly, around the use of magic iconography when referring to AI, right? So it's always like a sparkle, it's a magic wand. That is very intentional, right? Because you are meant to believe that this is magical. It's bigger, So a lot of like whether explicitly or implicitly, that is the narrative that is being pushed, right? If something is magical, then I, layperson, who am I to question it or audit it or, what does an assessment mean on magic?
Are we currently in January of 2026, going into February, are we currently allowing these companies to self-regulate their AI safety?
More or less, yeah. So it's not even just self-regulating. They're defining what safety means, right? So one of the most dangerous things that happened a few years ago is that all these companies woke up to the fact that power actually lies in government. I think if we look at the version one of tech companies, like social media companies, they avoided going to DC like the plague. Like you could not drag Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey to DC like kicking and screaming, right? They hated being there. But this new generation, the new generation of AI companies, especially OpenAI, I mean, they were all in on DC, right? They are everywhere. And now we're seeing Andreessen Horowitz, which is the largest venture capital firm. And by the way, Mark Andreessen has some very outspoken perspectives on issues like DEI, et cetera, AI regulation, opening one of the largest offices, like lobbying offices in DC. And, this goes back to thing. And again, this always goes back to just human institutions and regular people and things that regular people understand, because none of this is magic, right? The fact that these companies can pour hundreds of millions of dollars into lobbying DC to get the kind of regulation they want, to define AI safety and security they want it defined, the way they want it defined, and they have an administration that is more than willing to do that for them is very, very dangerous just for regular people. And nowhere in that did I bring in the specter of a magical AI. And to your point, it's as if we let oil companies run all of the committees to regulate, to create environmental protections, right? Like that is literally what we're doing with AI, because the narrative, again, it's very calculated. This technology is magic. All of us who build this are smarter than all of you. Who are you to say you should question it? Oh, well, now you want to make a committee to define safety. Yes, of course, we should be on that committee of us as the company, because again, we are the only people smart enough to do it, you know, and they have created this narrative for themselves where they've captured regulation. The regulatory capture is very dangerous because nowhere in their narrative are issues of bias, discrimination. Now they're forced to think about things like mental health because they are being literally sued, right? A year ago, none of them would answer a question about, children having mental health issues due to AI. That was not of interest. What was of interest is AI. If you, and you can, all these papers are publicly available. You can read. They write these system cards called system card every time they release a new model, and they're transparent with the kind of testing they do and what they test for. And they test for things like how would AI run an economy? Why do I care? My question would be, why would we let an AI run an economy? Like, there's a lot of human institutions that would have to be eradicated for an AI, and yet that is how safety is being defined. Will AI set off nuclear weapons? How would AI run an economy? Is AI going to lie to us? Nowhere in that is understanding human institutions, the real issues facing people, and it is very, very purposeful. It's very, very purposeful.
We just recorded a couple sessions of episodes that are going to precede this one with, cybersecurity experts, AI and defense experts, certainly conversations like this around responsible AI. So this is definitely a theme that I really want to tackle. But part of it is, how do we make sense of it for people? So as I mentioned, kind of the general public, they're leaning in, they're more curious. But I want to pivot to some of your work, because I think
Yeah.
I know you're very passionate about this, and I don't think you're going to stop until you figure out how to bring responsible AI to the masses. And I love that about you. I love that you have this innate interest in trying to get the message out. So I want to step back on a couple of things and make it more practical. So it's not like, hey, let's say, how is AI going to run the economy? Let's go tactical, practical.
Absolutely.
So DEF CON, I didn't know what DEF CON was. When I started learning from you, learning about you, reading about you, I didn't know, I never heard red teaming before.
Mhm.
So can you talk a little bit about the practical, actually what you do,
Yep.
what you've been doing the last few years? What is red teaming? What was DEF CON? What is DEF CON? Can you go through how you're auditing data and LLMs and
Yeah,
trying to
yeah.
bring security and insights into the data? Talk a little bit about your
Yeah,
work.
absolutely. So DEF CON is the largest cybersecurity hacker conference, and it is many decades old, right? So, so when you literally think of the movie Hackers, the vibe at DEF CON is very inspired by that kind of, very futuristic, cyberpunky vibe. So it's a lot of hacker types in a room, actually very, very giant rooms. It's in Vegas. It's massive. And a few years ago, when generative AI first came out, I worked with some people to do an evaluation exercise called red teaming. So, red teaming is something that's very popular in the hacker community. Red teaming, it originally comes from the military. It's the practice of identifying and stress testing models for the worst things you could possibly make them do, right? So, from the hacker community, they think about malicious actors. They think about like bad people trying to do bad things, right? Steal your password, steal your data, manipulate a system, right? So with AI red teaming, from a cybersecurity perspective, at a malicious actors perspective, it's how might somebody, poison the data training an AI to make it do a bad outcome. The kind of red teaming I do is actually more about testing the models for the worst things it can do when somebody is innocently interacting with it, which is actually a situation that happens more often with AI models than we've ever seen with other types of software.
I want to pause there.
Yeah.
Double click on what you just said, because I think this was a big light bulb moment for me. It's about like testing, lab testing for LLMs versus, I'll call it human centered testing. Just can you
Yeah.
double click on that a little bit so we all understand it?
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. So what I look at, is usually defined in this realm of like unintended consequences. And in many ways, it's almost harder than the cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is not easy by any means, but in that case, it's like easy to visualize bad guys doing bad things and you stop the bad guy, right? Many movies have been made about things like this. What I'm looking at is something a little bit different and in some ways more insidious, right? It's how these biases creep into how this data is built, or when a particular community of practice or people want to work with the AI model, the output is harmful to them. And I'm going to actually use the example that you had provided about these filmmakers trying to use AI and saying like, hey, why is it that whenever I wanted to generate something in the Middle East, it does that weird like sepia wash, and the Muslim call to prayer is playing in the background and some guy with a gun is running by in the background.
Well,
I
the exact
figure
example was we interviewed a couple out of India, and they said in the very early stages when they were using these models, anytime they had an environment of India, it showed kind of the worst example,
poverty. Yep, yep,
poverty.
yep.
And
Yeah,
they said it's gotten much better just in the last few years. So go
but
ahead.
and to your point, like that doesn't happen by accident. That happens because people have these experiences. And so traditionally what happens is like someone like these filmmakers have to have these experiences. These experiences have to go viral somehow, right? But the harm is done, right? And that's for people who understand the bias. But let's just say you are, you know, Joe somebody in in like middle America, and you're like, wow, that must be what India looks like, just full of poor people digging in the dirt, right? And it's reinforcing a bias maybe you already have, or introducing a bias, right? Because you believe that generative AI is smart, that it is, smarter than you for sure, right? So if it's telling you this is what India looks like, wow, India must be this horrible poverty-stricken place, right? So that's what I worry about. So that's a great example, right? Where it's insidious in the sense that it is very subversive. It introduces biases, it perpetuates biases, it reinforces biases and harms. And we looked at a wide range of things. So the event we did at DEF CON was phenomenal, sponsored by the White House, is the Biden White House. We used something called the AI Bill of Rights, which was written by the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy. And we tested using against the AI Bill of Rights, which actually had protections against things like privacy, but also things like bias and discrimination, right? Some of which, by the way, is codified into law. Like you are legally not allowed to discriminate in hiring against people of certain protected classes, but then you introduce AI, which is biased, into this mix, right? And it was really eye opening. And the whole point was just to bring in regular people. So we brought in students from historically Black universities and community colleges. We flew them into Vegas to experience DEF CON, learn about a career and a profession that they maybe never even heard of, and also have their perspectives reflected in how these models are being tested. Because at the end of the day, these perspectives, those filmmakers in India, these kids at HBCUs, those are the voices that are not heard when models are being built. They're the voices that are not heard when models are being tested. And the reality is, it is possible to do that. It's just a decision whether or not the company wants to build that infrastructure and build those systems to capture those voices.
During the DEF CON a few years ago when ChatGPT launched, you were in Vegas. You read this red teaming. You brought in these other entities, some experts, but also these students, that sort of thing. You had a couple aha moments. Can you talk a little bit about like what you found, what were some of the results of those findings in that audit?
Gosh, there were so many. Also just the perspectives of people, like, and this is why diverse perspectives is important. Like, I'm somebody who thinks about this all day, and yet I'm constantly
Mm,
surprised. And also the fact that like some of these are not clear-cut answers. I think sometimes people don't want to do this kind of testing because there is no objective right or objective wrong. And often the discussion is about, and actually this is a topic of discussion that goes back to like search engines, right? So should these models reflect reality, which could be biased, or should it aim for an ideal world? And one can make arguments for both sides. So with search engines, it was the same thing, right? So if you so Dr. Sophia Noble, who's a MacArthur Genius Grant winner, wrote the book Algorithms of Oppression, and she wrote about how when you would type into Google, why are black girls? It would bring up so problematic, so argumentative, so loud. Why are white girls so pretty? Like positive things about non-black women. We're reinforcing codifying the bias. The same thing with these generative AI models. If you ask it to make images of doctors, it overwhelmingly makes images of men. If you ask it to make images of nurses, it overwhelmingly makes images of women. One can argue that's what the world is. It's actually not what the world is, by the way. There are more women in medical school than there are men. That aside, that's the way the world has been. That's what the training data reflects. But also, we can decide we want to aim for a more optimistic and diverse world. So like that was one of the aha moments, is that like these things are things that people debate, and these are discussions that companies have, and there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer from any of these things. I find that really fascinating. Another one, interestingly, was bartender. Overwhelmingly, asking generative AI to make images of bartenders brings up like this one kind of guy. It's not even just guys, it's this one kind of guy, and he's always got brown hair and a beard, and his sleeves are rolled up, and it's like you see that guy in your head. Everybody listening sees that guy in their head, and it's just kind of funny, right? But also again, like that's a comical example, but it can be insidious. Rest of World, which is one of my favorite media outlets, did a really, really good analysis. And they were trying to make images of a doctor helping children in Africa, doctor helping Black children, African children. And it was making constantly made a white doctor helping Black children. And it just could not fathom that you could have a Black doctor helping Black children in Africa. It was, those are all, and again, the India one actually came up there too. If you ask it to make an Indian man, it would make this sort of old Swami looking
yeah,
guy,
yeah,
like fall into every stereotype. So yeah,
yeah.
I mean, the aha moments one was just that a lot of these things are things that we debate in society.
Briefly
Yeah.
mentioned bias bounty.
Yes.
Tell us about bias bounty because I think that's really a lot of what you're talking about here, right?
So the bias bounty program started actually when I was at Twitter. So understanding a diverse range of voices, even though like I was tasked with doing that, I had an amazing team to do that. There's an immense amount of privilege that brings you to even get a job in Silicon Valley, let alone get a job at Twitter, let alone get a job on my team at Twitter, right? So every time what I realized is that I can do my best to make a diverse team, but I know it will never capture the widest range of perspectives possible. So borrowing again from cybersecurity, I created the notion of a bias bounty, which is similar to in cybersecurity, they have bug bounties. So bug bounty programs are really robust in cybersecurity. They've built out methods where there are external people who get paid to find bugs and issues, and you can also report bugs and issues in software like hacker type vulnerabilities and get paid for it. And I started to create a similar program at Twitter where we opened up for the first time, we actually opened up Twitter code and we asked people to surface and identify biases. And this was our image cropping AI model. We had found some biases based on appearance of age, gender, as well as skin tone. But I knew there were so many more biases that existed than that. And people, like speaking of aha moments, really interesting one. So one that somebody surfaced is about religious head coverings. People tended to be cropped out of photos if they were wearing a head covering. This could be like a yarmulke, this could be a hijab, and it's because it didn't understand that without hair you were still a human. It would crop them out. Disability bias, where people in wheelchairs would be cropped out of photos because most people are standing, they're sitting. So the quote natural way to crop it would be to crop them out. Another one which was fascinating was military camouflage, which I guess worked as intended because people wearing camouflage would get cropped out of photos. And again, this was all like citizen data scientists, people out in the world who submitted these biases, and again, not stuff that I would have ever thought of or anybody on my team would have ever really thought of. And I really loved like that really, you said that I'm kind of very passionate about like that to me was just such a moment where I learned so much from the general public and to know that it is possible to do it. And all you really need is the institutional support to build the program. It is not possible to build it because I did it. And the only thing that's needed is the institutional will, right? And the funding to do it. Like, that's really
What
what
year
drives
was
me.
that?
It was during COVID. So I want to say it was like 2020, 2021.
No, that seems like 100 years ago
I know it
in
really.
this space. I often talk about some of the things we're talking about. I would love to have had this conversation 2 years ago, and maybe we'll talk again in a year or two. But like, what was your thinking a year or two ago versus today? It's changing, correct? Like the space is changing, but the principles are probably always still there. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. And generative AI actually makes it easier. So the first iteration of Humane Intelligence actually started pre-Gen AI, and we actually changed the name of the organization to Humane Intelligence when we shifted to doing red teaming for Gen AI. But before then, we were running these bias bounty programs for fun, right? And what my passion has been is creating this independent community of evaluators. In order to do that, people need to learn and understand how you evaluate a model if you don't own the model, if you're sitting on the outside. So we started to create these technical programs, these challenges, these paid challenges to get people interested in doing this kind of evaluative work, this kind of auditing style work. So the original name for Humane Intelligence actually Bias Buccaneers. We had this whole pirate theme. It was kind of a lark. We did it for fun. And it was great. And then generative AI, what that really did was it opened up these models to people who were not programmers. So when we would do the bias bounty programs, you had to submit code because the only way to interact with an AI model was via coding. And I would always get asked, like, how can just a regular person, a non-programmer, participate in this? I would honestly say, I don't know. Generative AI put the interface of AI directly in everybody's hands. So I saw that as an opportunity to finally do things the way everyone had been asking for and the way I wanted to, which is that regular people, you don't have to program in order to interact with this model.
So, what you just touched on makes me think of the word trust. In the work that I do, the word trust comes up a lot. It's often kind of thrown away as just theoretical, kind of soft and not tangible. I'm deeply worried about trust. Trust feels thinner today everywhere in government, in
Yep.
media, in companies, in each other. Trust feels like it's just thinner than ever.
Yeah.
And my question is, does generative AI, does the space of AI, is it making it more thin? Is it eroding trust more so? And is it more fragile than it already has been because of
I
AI?
mean, yeah, the short answer is yes, and it's really unfortunate. There's many ways that it's happening, and again, it frustrates me because I think people like myself have been banging this drum for quite some time. So, but it is like there's been a multi-pronged attack on this idea of trust, right? So some of it has been justified and some of it not justified, right? So I think during COVID, there was a lot of mistrust of medical institutions, just as an example. Again, some of it valid, some of it not valid. I think, there has been an attack on institutions of learning and institutions of knowledge for quite some time. There's been an attack on science for quite some time, right? And this is not has nothing to do with AI. What AI brings into it is the confusion, right? So now anybody can generate a very realistic looking media article, a very realistic looking academic paper, right? And we really need to understand that we are entering a post truth world where nothing we can see online really will be trustworthy. And I do appreciate that companies, for example, Google has this authenticator, but that's really not how misinformation works. In order to use this authenticator that Google has built, you would have to download the image, put it into their authenticator, and then they'll tell you if it's true or not. But again, misinformation, these are very insidious, right? It feeds into what your brain wants to see. We all know, we understand what manipulation by algorithms looks like, right? We know that social media feeds tend to reinforce our worldview. Great. Well, now the images will be fake and reinforce our worldview. And that is a very specific, targeted intent. Elon Musk accidentally stumbled into a great example where when X started to show where the location of certain accounts, and people realized that a lot of the accounts that they thought were American or pro-Trump or whatever, some perspective, or coming out of Nigeria, Bangladesh, and it was, this is not, some woman in Kansas who has 3 kids and is pro-Trump. It's actually, somebody sitting in Bangladesh, like rage baiting and farming content, and it's
Right.
really dangerous. So yeah, I mean, I sadly, trust is at an all-time low. There are many fingers to point in many different directions. I think AI is just accelerating this. I'll also add, by the way, that technology built a lot of trust capital in the 2000s, right? We were given life changing, world changing, society changing technologies. And I think there was certainly a time, again, especially in the 2000s and the early 2010s, where like technology was this objective good. And I think that companies got too used to that and they assumed that they are owed this trust. But what they did was they built this massive savings bank of trust and they just drew down on it for years and years and years and years. And now the bank account's nearing zero and people are done. They are uninterested. And I'm seeing a lot more movement back to older technologies. It's just an example. Yesterday, I downloaded an RSS feed. Remember RSS feeds? Because I am tired of seeing the content on social media, half of which is fake, half of which is rage bait, right? Only like some small percent is actually real or true or interesting to me. I went back to going to RSS feeds, um, just as an example. So yeah, you're 100% correct. But that erosion of trust is like, some of it was an intentional attack. Some of it is capitalistic greed. Some of it is this technology that makes it really, really easy to make things look fake on the internet. And all of it's kind of come together. Oh, part of it was also COVID, right? And then all of that's kind of come together into this perfect storm.
I've never heard someone describe kind of the 2000s kind of building out this wealth of trust before, but I think you're really onto something. That nails it because I think you're right. Trust is going to be critical. I think the blurring lines of what is real and what is not, we're already seeing that kind of vanish.
Yeah.
There's a phrase that I also got from you in doing some research, right to repair.
Yes.
Help us understand the thinking on right to repair in this context.
Yeah, I did a TED talk on this 2 years ago, and the concept of right to repair is not a new one at all. It actually goes to the early days of technology, early days of the internet, and it's not just about software. It starts with hardware, like tools. Actually, very if you get super into right to repair, a lot of it has been around McDonald's ice cream machines, like the soft serve ice cream machines. A lot of the so during the previous administration, there were some right to repair wins specifically around the ability to repair those machines. So, what is right to repair? So, we assume that when we buy a product, you own it. And ownership is a very interesting thing, right? Because in the era of technology, what does it mean to own something, right? So, if I, let's say, buy this cup and I want to personalize it like I did here with my initials, like that's something I can do. And then, I have a right to go do that. The, Yeti company doesn't come and say, hey, you can't personalize this cup because, it's inviolable. But by the way, I can't do that to my phone. Like I can't change my phone's operating system, or you can, but you then violate any sort of warranty, any terms of service, like you're kind of on your own. And increasingly, that is encroached into more and more things, right? Our cars used to be something that people repaired, tinkered with all the time. So our cars are 99% computers now. You cannot tinker with your car. It's not a thing people really can do because your car is sophisticated software. So that's fine, like as a hobbyist. But what does that then mean when we talk about AI models? So this very, very impactful life-changing technology is being introduced. When I say life-changing, I mean for each of us as individuals. This is a technology that decides if we should get a job, get a loan, what school our kids will go to. It will increasingly decide medical care. It's definitely used in insurance companies. And yet, we have no right to say, hey, I think this was wrong or this didn't work. So what I'm trying to do is imagine a world, that's what this talk was about, is imagine a world in which you had a right to do that. What does that mean? What does it mean? And it's such a foreign concept. It's really hard to even imagine. What does it mean to own an AI model, repair an AI model? Because we have such a broken top down system now that we didn't used to have before, where technology is built and it's shoved down our throats. And we have to adjust our lives around it or manipulate or maneuver around it. But the one thing we don't ask, which we should ask, is why is this technology working like this? And what right do I have to fix it if something is very, very wrong? And again, it doesn't have to be like life-changingly bad, but I do think that in order to get this adoption, you're talking about AI agents, right? And the end of my talk, I talk a bit about agents because I was like, agents were just a concept when I gave my TED talk, and I'm like, well, you know what? The era of AI agents is really going to push this conversation to the forefront. Because what is an agent? An agent is when you are saying that this model is taking some action on your behalf. So choose my insurance for me, or book my trip for me. Well, I sure as hell am not doing that if I that don't trust the system, number one. And number two, if I don't have a way of correcting it. So let's say, I'm telling this AI model, AI agent to choose an insurance for me and it chooses the absolutely wrong insurance. What kind of feedback can I give it so it's not making that mistake again? Right now, we don't build that into our system. So the right to repair is kind of a concept, it's a dream, it's a vision, but it's also a different way of thinking about our interaction with our relationship with technology, our interaction with technology. And it's a blueprint for how we should think about how society should be constructed, thinking about how AI models influence every aspect of our lives.
I love it. It flies in the face of what we're seeing, right? It's a winner take all. There's like five guys,
There
half
really
dozen,
are. There's like
half
three
dozen,
guys.
three guys, half dozen
I wish
companies
there were
across.
five, I
Yeah.
guess.
And it's winner take all mentality. If
Yeah,
we don't do it, China will do it. There's this kind of, I'm a guy, so I hate to say it, but it's a bro kind of thing.
it is a bro
It's
thing. I fully
fascinating
agree.
to me, to be honest with you, when I dug deeper into security and responsibility and safety. Women, women, women. When I talk about data and AI it's men. So I find that in and of itself fascinating. I do want to kind of like talk about a couple things real quick. I know we're running
Yeah.
long. Can you talk about, I know a lot of this is doom and gloom for people who are listening. They're going, oh, what do we do? Can you talk about how do you see AI for good? What does AI for good look like to you? What does that look like?
That's interesting because I have like, I think that's a very fraught phrase. So often responsible AI and AI for good get conflated with each other. I actually think they're two different things. AI for good is like charitable AI. So it's, let's say, building AI to help people who are blind, or building AI to, whatever, provide better medical services in parts of the world where they don't have access to doctors, right? For me, the AI for good is charitable, right? It's doing a service. Responsible AI is different. Responsible AI is sort of fundamentally ensuring that the technology that is built in a way that's inclusive and responsible, right? So the work I do is actually responsible AI. So I work, like right now, I'm working with an insurance company. That's not AI for good. I am ensuring that these models that these insurance companies, that's like, it's like a home insurance company is building, are not biased in a particular way, that they're fraud proof. That's very different from, let's say, if I were building an AI model, to do image detection for, whatever, like people who have poor eyesight, or a lot of people are focusing on elderly communities or vulnerable communities. But those are, in my the problem with the two of them getting conflated with each other is that responsible AI then stops becoming a fundamental part of how AI is built, which is what I think it should be. Often, and unfortunately, for good things are seen as like a bonus. So, and also, just to get more specific, when something is built for good, you are not in the room when the core technology is being built. You're just a service provider that's using this technology for good, using it to create whatever, a writing tutor for kids who don't have access to good teachers. That's very, very different from saying, no, I need to be in the room when the fundamental technology is being built, because I need to make sure that when that writing tutor is built for these kids in, let's say, India, it's not perpetuating biases that would be built into the model. So they're two separate things. They're both very needed. They're both very necessary. But that is like my hill that I die on, that maybe other people don't nitpick as much. Well, and I do it for a very specific reason, because often the question is like, why does responsible AI need to be in the room, in these fundamental conversations? And it's because of a misdirected framing of what responsible AI is.
There's two things that come to mind when we're talking about AI for good, in my mind. And it goes back to some of the cognitive offloading and job loss and some of those conversations we touched on a little bit earlier. We're knowledge work is being disrupted, right? And the job loss around knowledge work is there. My question is more about, there's nonstop fear of job loss, to be honest with you. The masses are curious. I don't think this is going to just change a job or skills or a role. I liken this to when Apple launched their iPhone and they would a year later, like a new app would show up and it would wipe out an entire industry. Like it would just change not a job or a company, like an entire industry would be changed. I happen to be in the music industry when MP3 file compression came out and Napster came out. And like I saw that, I've talked about it many times in my career of seeing industries like completely being blown up, disrupted. So I guess my question just around knowledge work and some of the conversations we're having around AI and right to repair, can you just talk about what you see of disruption of knowledge and AI? How does that play out in your world?
And I'm glad you brought up the phrase knowledge work. So
Okay.
one of the things I no, I'm glad you did because when I do my talks about AI, I'm very careful to balance, you know, defining this technology as not magical with the concept that actually it is very, very different from every other technological. So every other technological innovation we've had, even the internet, right? Whether it's like, we call it the fourth industrial revolution, but every other industrial revolution has always automated like physical labor, right? So the industrial revolution automated production, right? We create more efficient means of production. Even the internet was actually the automation of knowledge sharing, so it made it easier to distribute and share information. What generative AI does, as you've correctly pointed out, is we are now automating knowledge production, and we've never done that before. And that is what scares people. But it's interesting because the people who are the most scared are the people in jobs like ours, white collar jobs, because we are the jobs that have always been protected. So if you were, a farrier, if you were somebody who shoed horses, you were very worried in the first industrial revolution because you're like, well, now there's these assembly lines making these cars, and now we're not going to have horses as much anymore. What am I going to do for a job? If you were a shoemaker, if you were a carpenter, you had to then shift and think about how you were doing what you were doing. With generative AI, it's interesting because it's almost the flip opposite. I talk a lot about young people. So like the two things I'm the most interested in for 2026 is education and the future of work. So two of them are intertwined in so many different ways. And one of them, we are starting to see that job disruption, and it is overwhelmingly impacting young people. So one of the most dangerous things about some of the narratives around the future of work is people are presenting this like UBI idea, this idea that we will have zero jobs in the future. I think that is wrong. We are not going to have zero jobs in the future. And I think that distracts from what is really happening, which is what you said, which is that this one layer of jobs is being eradicated. But instead of being eradicated vertically, so like apps would destroy verticals, we're destroying a horizontal. And it is the bottom layer of knowledge work. This is what interns would do. This is what you did at your first job. It's what I did at my first job. That's what's being taken away. And the people being impacted the most are the people in college, the kids in college today, and the people fresh out of college. And if you talk to these kids, I talk to a lot of these kids, their conversations, I was trying to convince these people I talked to yesterday about this, these major education funders. I'm like, look, the question today is not what college should I go to, even for very talented kids. It's should I even go to college? Like, I'm like, please, I want you to understand this. Like for me, it was never a question. It was what college can I go to? What is the best college I can get into? There are people who are very, very good students. My exact profile when I was 17 or 18 were asking themselves if it's even worth it to pursue higher education anymore. And that is because of now like the automation of knowledge labor. What they're looking around and seeing is, let's say like, I live in Texas. Like right now I'm outside of Houston. And what they're seeing is their friends who are opening an HVAC company or a plumbing company, well, they're not worried about AI. If anything, AI is going to make their lives great. They're going to rake in money tomorrow because they're going to have a paid job. They're going to be making six figures in probably about a year or two. And they're like, well, am I the idiot going to Harvard and racking up debt for 4 years and then maybe there'll be a job for me, but I'm seeing consulting work being automated and nobody's hiring junior level engineers, so I don't know what to major in. So like I'm so glad you brought
Well,
exactly that phrase up, knowledge work.
you have an entire layer, as you call it, this horizontal of a younger generation who don't have what I call domain expertise. They're not in their 40s, 50s, 60s. They don't have a
That's right.
decade or 2 decades of experience and expertise that they can call on and basically leverage these tools into their work. They're trying to get that experience. And
That's right.
when these kind of white collar first world jobs are now being kind of activated by AI tools, it is a very big concern.
Everything with AI gets really hyperbolic And then people don't focus on the core issues, which are very, very, like very salient. And we don't focus on it because it's not as sexy as talking about universal basic income. But no, what we should focus on is how do we get young people jobs? How do we incentivize companies? And like, and explain, and also, by the way, I will tell you, every senior developer is really worried that junior developers are not being. CEOs love it. Senior developers are really worried about that because they're like, who's going to take over from me? Right? I would say engineering is the first of the jobs to have the bottom layer automated away. The senior people are the most concerned about that automation.
100%. I want to get into some tactical takeaways. A lot of times people will listen because they want to learn how to apply what you might be sharing with them. Before we do that, I gotta ask you a couple other things just around
Yeah,
this whole notion of job loss and the white collar jobs going away. Where are those jobs most vulnerable? And I ask you because you are in probably those industries helping them becoming more responsible with
right.
leveraging AI.
So one thing to look at, right, is how are these models being optimized? Remember when I had my whole soapbox moment of like who defines what good is, right? So how AI models are being evaluated and who's defining what good means is also an indicator of what the models will be good at doing, which is an indicator of what will be automated. So unsurprisingly, because three out of the like seven or eight benchmarks that these models are tested against are about programming, surprise, AI models are, really good at programming. And again, it's just about like everyone's optimizing to perform really well in these benchmarks. So programming has been one that's being automated away. Again, the sort of low level, like people use this phrase enthusiastic intern. I think that is the best way to think about AI models. So think about what entry level and an intern might do for you, right? Information synthesis, a bit of information gathering. They may not have the domain knowledge to understand what good or bad information is, but it can get you a breadth of information,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
It can read a report and summarize it for you. You probably need to check its work, right? Any way you might think of having an entry level employee is how you can think of having AI systems. So this goes, and that's a pretty broad swath. So like, and of course, like, so there's this good paper by OpenAI and some economists a few years ago. Actually, it was in 2023 called GPTs or GPTs, and it was looking at different verticals. And basically, their takeaway was with large language models, about 10% of 80% of jobs will be automated away, and about 90% of the last 20% of jobs will be automated away. So they were looking at things like paralegal. They were talking about journalism. I don't know if I agree with that, the journalism part, but anything where there's knowledge production as a job or review or analysis could be automated away. The things that would not would be higher level knowledge work, application of knowledge, and like you were just saying, like domain experts, right? So
Yeah.
people who understand enough to be discerning. And I wonder if, we've been living in an era for many, many years of being generalists, right? You had to be a little bit good at everything. And I wonder if we're going to go back to an era of like deep domain expertise because that's what leads to differentiation against AI. And AI is not going to ever be better than the experts in something, but it will be better than the people who are casual understanders of something.
Well, and I think it also leans into trust, right? You start to trust someone who's deeply embedded in an area of expertise and they have knowledge and hands-on experience. I think there's a trust that's built there.
Right.
I want to cover something else that's been kind of a theme throughout our show. We call it Disruptor Confessions. Two reasons. Disruption is around, and maybe I mentioned this to you when we first chatted, like there's people who are disrupting, people who are being disrupted, and then those who are observing the disruption all around. I think one of the things that, and you touched on this earlier, that feels different than anything we've seen, agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, even the digital disruption we've seen in the last 30, 40 years, this feels different for me. It feels different because it's faster, the pace has never been seen like this. And the scale seems like it's permeating every aspect, left to right, top to bottom. My first question is, do you agree that this feels different because of pace and scale?
Yes. Do you want me to elaborate, or is this like a rapid fire yes or no? So yes, and I can elaborate.
Yeah,
I
please
think a
do.
lot of it, yeah, I think a lot of it is almost like artificially driven, and it's driven by the fact that, like you mentioned, there's three guys in a room and they have all They own everything. So things can move a lot faster. And then the immense amount of pressure, this competition to build, build, build. I do find it funny, taking a step back, that the narrative pushed about AI is that all work will go away. But if you look at Silicon Valley, they've never literally worked harder. Now 996, which is adopted from China, is the norm in many places in Silicon Valley. 996 refers to working 6 days a week from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., meaning you're in the office on Saturday for 12 hours. And
I
that is,
I've heard
pe-
that there's a lot of engineers that are not leaving. I mean, they're young, 20 somethings, are not married with kids. They're
yeah,
literally living
yeah.
20.
So it's interesting that the industry that's telling us that we will have no jobs has never worked harder as an industry. And people are getting very, very severe burnout. So, again, like back to this, like, trust what I say, not what I do narrative that kind of seems to permeate tech. So yeah, I mean, I do think, but I do think there is immense amount of potential and people are trying to grab all the potential that they can.
Well, listen, we're running long. I want to run through some rapid fire questions. You up for it?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So if there's C-suite, mid-career or higher level C executives listening, and they're going into like early 2026 now, and they're looking ahead, and they've heard a lot about agentic or AI agents, and they need to bring what I call AI agents in the flow of work. I want to have you share with them what's one responsible AI decision every CEO should make in 2026.
Figuring out the problem and then making the solution. In other words, a lot of times people just get excited about bringing in agents or bringing in AI for no reason other than they're excited about the technology. The best thing to do to make sure something's built responsibly is actually have a real problem that needs to be solved and figure out how technology can solve it.
I love that. Let me switch over to policymakers. If policymakers got one thing wrong on AI regulation over the next year or two, what do you think would do the most damage?
A hyper focus on AI safety and security that focuses more on the capabilities of an AI model rather than the impact of that AI model on society. But let me expand on that a little bit. So, actually, this even started in the Biden administration, there was such a narrative on the capabilities of AI models. This goes back to like AI models can set off nuclear weapons, AI models can tell you how to make anthrax, that we ignored the issues that people have been talking about for years and years and years. Bias and discrimination in the applications, right? Like, I get it, it's boring. Nobody wants to hear it anymore, but because we never fixed it. So there is it's like almost like a regulatory capture of all of this narrative is so hyper focused on defense and capabilities, and there is very little focus on the things. But the thing is, like, these are the issues that are bubbling up in society. AI psychosis is one of them, like mental health I mentioned earlier. Another one absolutely is going to be hiring. Another one is going, like, rather than focus on the impact on society, people are a lot of this focus in DC is often on these existential questions of, oh, will AI kill us all? Like, AI, trust me, we will do a good enough job of that ourselves. Don't need AI to do that for us.
Well, and I think about Tristan Harris and social media and the drum that he's been beating for over a decade. I think we're now at the dawn and probably moving a little bit deeper than that into AI. And I think the decisions that we make at the corporate level, in industry, as individuals, and at the policy level today,
Right.
2025, 2026, are going to have long-term effects. 15-year-olds who are using AI for 10 years, what will they become at 25, 30 years old?
Yeah.
Those are the questions that I'm asking. I want to jump into a couple other things. So it's early 2026. Looking forward, I know people like you hate probably predicting, but what is the most underrated AI risk right now?
I would say underrated because it's underdefined is actually what we talked about earlier is over-reliance. People are throwing around this term. We have not defined what it means. I think it is underrated in the sense that it's like a decorator word that
Mm.
holds no meaning. And we need to build meaning around over-reliance because that's going to have downstream impacts on understanding mental health, education, jobs, all of it, right? Clearly defining what it means to become to overuse this technology.
That actually goes to my next question. What's the most overrated claim that's being made by these leading companies about their models?
Oh, easy. Super intelligence. As a social scientist, Oh, their definition of intelligence just rankles me. It really just drives me up a wall. And actually, I have a small podcast series coming out soon. It's almost like half masterclass, half podcast, really. It was part of my time at Harvard as a responsible AI fellow. And I brought together students from all across Harvard in all sorts of different fields. And we talked about intelligence as a social, economic, and political construct. So the thing that really bothers me the most is that tech companies talk about intelligence as if it is clearly defined and as if intelligence is just being able to regurgitate information. That is not what intelligence is at all. And so many of the issues that we see in AI models, yes, the AI model can tell you, can answer hyper sophisticated physics questions, but it can't like do basic things that an 8-year-old can do. And that's because this idea of intelligence is being just driven by like factuality, which is very childish in many ways. And again, if you look at other fields of science that have studied intelligence, there are ways we measure intelligence in animals and also the conflation of intelligence with sentience. That is my other like, oh, it drives me up a wall,
I think
right?
we I think we just figured out a topic that our next time we get you on the show, like I think we just hit a trigger.
We really like I have so many thoughts on well also because again like it all goes back to society, right? The idea of intelligence or even measuring intelligence is so fraught.
Mm,
It's so very fraught. Measurement of intelligence is tied with eugenics, right? It's tied in with racism, it's tied in with sexism,
yeah,
and
yeah,
to
yeah.
pretend that the way we measure intelligence is because it's a machine is divorced of that. And by the way, rule number one in any legitimate scientific field in studying intelligence is do not base intelligence on human capability. Guess what we do out of the gate with AI is we base it on human capability because like technically a mantis shrimp has the ability to see things we cannot see because a mantis shrimp has a spectrum of light that it sees that we could not fathom. But we would not say a mantis shrimp is more intelligent than us in the way we measure intelligence, but in some ways, it's definitely more perceptive than us. And again, it's like the constructs of intelligence are very, very interesting.
You know this better than anyone, so I'm preaching to the choir. But like when I go on a Gemini or GPT or Claude or whatever, it's very white US based kind of thinking.
Yes, it is.
It's not how we live. It doesn't know the smell of an orange. It cannot figure out how to tell me how an orange smells differently than a lime or whatever. So
Right,
yes,
right.
I 100%. And you've actually, and I won't, we won't get into it because we're running long, but you've talked about that. It's really just a reflection of our knowledge that we put out there on Wikipedia.
No, it is. And I mean, they'll always say, oh, it's the data of the world. That's incorrect. It's the data of the internet. And
Yeah, yeah.
this predates me. There are amazing organizations. One that I love is called Whose Knowledge, which is actually about decolonizing and diversifying the
Mm.
data on the internet because there are entire communities that are not represented on the internet. So, yes, it is correct to say these large language models are based on the data of the internet. It is incorrect to say it's based on the data of the world because the world is not represented in the internet. And diversifying that, to your point, is what's critically important. And you're right, the fact that most of these companies are based in the United States reflects obvious structural biases and what was prioritized and not prioritized in these models. There's this new project that I'm going to be helping out with for like the next billion users. Essentially, traditional AI models are focused on these like the top billion people, like the wealthy, white, largely Eurocentric, Western centric countries. What does it look like to evaluate AI models for the next billion people, right? So for developing countries, what are the kinds of things that people in these countries might prioritize or look for in an AI model, which may be actually very, very different from what the richest countries and the most privileged countries might do. And I'm super excited about that work because that's the kind of work I want to see out there.
So a lot of times I'll ask guests what keeps you up at night, but I want to frame this differently for you. First serious AI governance failure that you would expect to see.
I am concerned that the EU AI Act is getting very watered down and it's starting to be very driven by it's starting to become focused on kind of the wrong things. While I like the existence of that act, I think the scoping and defining of it has been a little bit frustrating. It's built on the idea of a conformance assessment. So conformance assessment is like pretty normal in product development. So let's say there's like a checklist and you're making a car seat for a baby. There are certain things you have to test for, and a conformance assessment is like, okay, crash rating this, the belt buckles like this, da da da. So the EU AI Act is sort of built around that mentality. So I think that there is a lot of hope being put into the EU AI Act that it will act as a counterbalance, and I worry that it won't.
On the other side, and then we can wrap, but you're thinking about predictions in 2026, 2027. You're in your mind, you're thinking, well, here's what I think is going to happen. What do you hope you're wrong about in the future?
I hope I'm wrong about what I just said
Really? Yeah.
about the EU AI Act. Like, I desperately want to be wrong about that. I desperately want to be wrong about this lack of focus on young people and their interactions with technology. So whether you call it addiction or reliance or whatever it is, I
Mm.
think it is just being under discussed, or it's being discussed from a very like old people wagging their fingers at young people perspective, which is very in some ways like disrespectful but also just wrong. I was just talking yesterday to somebody and I was joking, I'm like, look, we're the old people and we have to understand how they use this technology rather than prescribing to them how we think they should use it because we use things the old way. Like, I think just having that humility, but we're all the decision makers in the room. We're the ones that define these things. So I hope I'm desperately wrong about that. I hope that people don't just have this negative knee jerk reaction to like that's wrong or that's bad. Because I've overwhelmingly found that even in general, like telling young people that something is wrong or bad just makes them hide it. And the worst thing we could possibly do is to tell them something is inherently wrong or bad rather than respecting their perspectives and understanding how to navigate forward from their perspectives rather than enforcing ours on them. This is a podcast about disruption. Every institution is being disrupted now. And I think it makes a lot of us scared. And I understand, like, I excel at institutions. Right? So it's like you're yanking out from under me all the things I'm really good at, right?
Right.
And I'm too
Right.
old and too tired to do it all over again. So I can understand where it's coming from, but it's going to happen.
Yeah. Ginny
So
Rometty, I think, is famous for saying, be comfortable with being uncomfortable or something to that effect.
absolutely. I that is the new norm.
Yeah. Listen, I'll let you go. Thank you so much. Can I ask you, where can people find you? Where should they follow you if they want to learn more about your work and what you're doing, the work you're doing now and coming up?
Well, my website's a really great place to find out a little bit more about me. And you can also always get in touch by my website. It's just my name. So www.rummanchowdhury.com.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much. We covered a lot of ground. Boy, I think we could have dug deeper into some of the topics that we touched on.
So, by
Uh,
the way, the intelligence thing, I didn't mention it because I'm
yeah,
still working on the deal. I'm actually going to be writing a book on the topic of intelligence. It's going to hopefully be published by Bloomsbury Press. We're just sort of working out all the details. It's actually going to be the first in a series about AI. So, it's all going to be written, each book is going to be written by a different author, and I'm writing the first one. And it's really like that's why I deep dove into intelligence quite a bit. It's just so interesting.
wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Listen, for those of you that joined us, thank you for listening to Disruptor Confessions. Please reach out to Rumman. She's got some great information and insights on her website. You can follow us on YouTube, follow us on Substack. And until next time, please stay curious. Thanks so much.